Okay, so what you're going to need for this project is you're going to need to download the pattern off of my website for Mamaw's Potholder. And then you're going to use this pattern to cut 4 pieces of quilting cotton, a piece of cotton batting, and a piece of Insul Bright. Now you can either trace this around the full oval and cut them out, or pin it down and cut all the way around the oval, or you can fold it in half like this and place it on the fold of your fabric to where you're just cutting around a half of an oval and then unfolding it, and it will make the full oval. So once you cut out your pattern pieces, you should have 4 pieces of cotton batting. 4 pieces of quilt cotton, a piece of Insul Bright, and a piece of cotton batting. You're going to need some marking pens for your fabric, some regular sewing pins, and some fabric scissors. Okay, and then you're also going to need a strip that is 2 inches by 26 inches long. If you're cutting this out of just 1 fat quarter, you'll have enough to cut 2 pieces to connect together to make that length. You're also going to need a 2 inch by 4 inch piece for the hanging loop. So I'm just going to cut this strip here. It's a 2 inch by the width of the fabric here. And then I'm going to measure it out and cut it. 24, 25, 26. Okay, so that's about right there. And that's going to be my binding strip. And then I need a 4 inch piece for my hanging loop. If you are using a fat quarter, you can get all 4 pieces of your quilting cotton out of 1 fat quarter with the hanging loop, and then you can cut pieces to piece together to make your binding strip all out of a fat quarter. It will all be the same color, but you can get that done if you need to. So this is a great scrappy project. So once you have all your pieces cut out, you're going to head over to your sewing machine. Now that you have all of your pieces cut, we're going to mark the centers of the long edges of our ovals. So to do that, I'm just going to take mine and I'm going to fold them in half. And then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to cut little tiny triangles off the edge, just a little teeny tiny nip off the edge so that you have a little tiny triangle cut out of the edge. So I'm going to do that on all 4 of these. Now that you've marked all the centers of all of your pieces, we're going to take the top pieces here and we're going to give it a good press, and then we're going to fold it in half, and we're going to give it another good press and make sure you have a nice sharp crease along the fold. And then set it aside and do the other one. And then give all your other pieces a good press to make sure there's no wrinkles. Then you're going to take your hanging loop that's 4 inches by 2 inches and we're going to fold it in half, what my kids call hot dog style. This was folding it hamburger style because it's shorter. They learned that in like elementary school and it has stuck ever since. Okay, then you're going to open up your loop and you're going to fold the raw edges in to touch the center to where they meet. And then you're going to fold the whole thing in half again to where you'll end up with a very skinny little loop. I think it's about 1/2 inch. And set that aside. And then give your binding strip a good press to make sure there's no wrinkles in it. And then I'll meet you back over at the sewing machine. The next step is going to be to top stitch our folded top pieces 1/4 inch away from the folded edge. I have an 1/8 inch presser foot on my machine, but if you have a 1/4 inch presser foot, just line the edge up with that. So now you have a top stitch for the part where your hand is going to go in. So set those aside. The next step is going to be to mark the center of your back piece. So whichever fabric you figured out that you wanted for the back of your pot holder, that's the piece you're going to mark on. We've marked the center with these two little clipped triangles, and I'm going to line the ruler up with that. And I'm just going to use my chalk wheel, and I'm going to make a chalk line going across there. You can use a marking pen, you can use a friction pen, however you want to mark it. Just make sure you have a line on there. And then we're going to take our pieces for the back, the lining piece, the Insel Bright, and the cotton batting, and we're going to make a sandwich. So it's going to be your lining piece, your Insel Bright. No, I'm wrong. You want your back to be touching the Insel Bright. And then you want your cotton batting on top of that. And then you want your lining on that, because you want your hands touching the side that has the cotton batting. So you're going to line all of those all up, and you can pin around the edges, or you can use quilting clips. I love these little clips because they're super fast and easy. So you're going to clip all the way around. You want the edges to line up as closely as possible, because you're going to baste this at 1/8 of an inch. So if any of the layers are outside that 1/8 of an inch, you'll miss them. So make sure that they're matching up as closely as you can. You may need to trim a little bit off of your batting. That's okay. Check on both sides that everything's matching up where it should be. And then we're going to take it over to our sewing machine, and we are going to stitch along this center line right here. Okay, now we're going to stitch right along that center line. And then you're going to take it and you're going to baste along the outside edge at 1/8 of an inch to hold all of these layers together. When you're going around a curve, just go really slowly and pivot it as you go. Now, as you can see, while I was sewing that, some of it shifted a little bit. That's okay. Just go back and trim this off a little bit. It's just a pot holder, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but just trim any of this excess off that may have shifted while you were sewing. Now we're going to add our fronts. Remember, the side that you drew the line on is the Insel Bright side. That's not the side we want to add these on. We want to add these onto the lining side. If you make the lining a different color than the rest of it, it would probably be easier for you to tell which side is which. But you can kind of feel this side's not as crinkly as this side. The Insel Bright's kind of crinkly. So we're going to add our tops to our pot holder, matching up the folded edges that we top stitched at the center marks. And then you're going to pin or clip all the way around. You're going to baste this all the way around again at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once again, if it's shifted at all or you've missed a spot, it's okay, just trim it off. What you're really wanting is a nice flat pot holder where you can get your hands in the crease in the middle. So that's all that really matters. So it's okay. It's just a pot holder. Nobody's going to look at it that closely. Just trim that off. Now we're going to sew our little hanging loop. So this is the 4" by 2" piece that we've folded in half and met the raw edges in the center and encased them. You're going to sew across both long edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Don't forget to turn your stitches back down to whatever stitch length you're sewing this together with. Mine's at a 3.5 if you turned it up while you were basting. take this little loop and you're going to fold it in half. And you're going to trim all your little threads off. And then you're going to take this and you're going to put it at the top center of whichever side you want to hang it from. So I think I'm going to go this way because this cow is going up and down. So I think I'm going to do it right here. And just kind of eyeball it. You can mark that center if you want to. I'm just going to base that on so it'll stay there. And now we're going to move on to our binding. All right, now we're ready for our binding. I'm going to be honest with you. I did this whole step and did not hit record. So I had to seam rip all of it back out just to do this again. So if it looks a little fuzzy, that's why. You're going to take your binding strip and you're going to fold over one end about a quarter of an inch to about a quarter of an inch. And I like to start at one of the creases where these two meet. And you're going to clip it right sides touching the side that has the two folded edges. And I'm just going to clip this going all the way around. Now, technically, you are supposed to use bias binding on curved seams, because when you cut something on the bias, which is the diagonal of the grain of the fabric, it gives it a little bit of stretch so that it can kind of form to the curves. But because this is just a pot holder and I tried to make the pattern to where you could make it out of a single fat quarter if you wanted to, we're just doing some straight binding. It's not that sharp of a curve, so it'll be fine. So you're just going to match up the right sides together and clip with the edge going around. And when you get back around to the beginning, you're going to overlap these ends. And because we folded that first end under, it's going to give it a finished look. Okay, so we've met back up here where we started, and I'm going to trim off a little bit of this. I left the selvage edge on that strip, so I'm going to trim that off. And then you're just going to overlap this raw edge with the edge that you folded, because when we fold this back, it'll give it kind of a finished edge. So now you're going to take this to your sewing machine and you're going to sew around this edge at a quarter of an inch seam allowance. Now when you're sewing around curves, you can use something like this. It's called a stiletto. That was hard to say for some reason. We were outside. It's a snowy day today here in Houston, Texas, which is highly unusual. So we've been out playing outside in the snow. So my throat is a little froggy right now. This is called a stiletto, and you can use this to help guide fabric near the needle so that you don't get your fingers too close to the needle. And what's nice about it is it has a nice sharp point on it, so it kind of grips as you go along. So you can use that to help ease this fabric as it goes around the curves and help push it kind of down and up underneath the presser foot as you go. When you're sewing around curves, just go slow. And don't watch the needle, watch where the edge of your fabric is going to make sure you've got a consistent seam allowance all the way around. When you get back to where you started, just go over the beginning of the stitches and back stitch and lock them in. Now we're going to take this and we're going to fold our binding around to the other side. Okay, I am not sure what is going on with my camera right now. For some reason, I have had to refilm this again because there was a big blurry spot on it. So you've sewn on your binding at a quarter of an inch seam allowance all the way around with the right sides touching the side that has the opening pockets. We're going to flip it around to the back side. And we're going to take the raw edge and touch the stitching line like that. So you're going to fold the raw edge to where it touches the stitching line, and then you're going to take the folded edge and it's going to go just a little bit over that stitching line, because when we sew it, we're sewing it on this side. And you want to be able to stitch in the ditch, meaning you're going to stitch where these two fabrics meet and catch where this is folded over in the back. I hope that makes sense, because I have described that 3 times now. So we're going to fold our raw edge in to where it's touching the stitching line, and then fold your binding over one more time so that it covers all of that raw edge and the stitching line. If for some reason you make this and you feel like your binding is a little too wide and it's sticking too far in, you can cut your binding down to 1 3/4 inches and it should still work. That's what I did on the first one. It was a little tight going around and making sure that I had enough room. So when I wrote the pattern, I didn't want anybody to struggle with that, so I wrote it for a 2-inch binding. But you could get away with 1 3/4 inches if it's just too much. So keep just tucking this raw edge down in there and then folding over to cover the stitching line, and you're going to clip all the way around. Now technically, because this is a round curve, you are supposed to use what's called bias binding. And what that means is you cut the fabric diagonal to the grain of the fabric, and it'll give it a little bit of stretch so that it'll kind of form around a curved seam. But this is just a simple potholder, and it doesn't have extreme curves, so this should work just fine doing a straight binding strip. So I'm just going to keep on tucking it in and folding it over and pinning it or clipping it. And when you get back around to the beginning, you'll have this original folded edge that we started with. You're going to fold that over and tuck it in and straighten it up to where it makes a nice, neat join right here. Okay, and then you're going to take this over to your sewing machine. You're going to sew from this side, and we're going to do what's called stitching in the ditch. So we're going to sew right where these two fabrics join in this seam. And you want to kind of feel on the back as you're sewing to make sure that this edge is getting caught in your stitching line. All right, so we're going to make sure that our needle is lined up right along this ditch right here. And we're going to watch the needle. This is the one time that you're going to watch the needle and not the edge of your fabric. You're going to make sure that your stitches are going right along where these two join. That's called stitching in the ditch. And as you go, make sure that this back side, that this folded edge right here is getting caught where you're stitching. I've got a lot of loose threads now. Now as you get to your loop, you want to make sure your loop is facing down and out of the way. And when you get back to where you started, just stitch over the first few stitches a little bit and then back stitch. All right, we are done. All right, and just like that, we are done. Go around and make sure that the edge of your binding got caught in all of the stitching, and make sure the front looks nice and neat. You could give it a good iron, but you are done. Didn't this make a fantastic little pot holder? So now you can stick your fingers in there, protect this from touching the edge of the stove, grab those hot pots. It's awesome. It makes a great gift. They sew up super quick once you get the hang of it down and you've done a couple. If you need to make it for somebody who has bigger hands and much nicer nails than I do, you can just adjust this by making your oval a little bit bigger, but you're also going to want to cut your binding a little bit longer to account for that. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please tag me whenever you make one of these so that I can see how yours turned out. It's at By the Bay Bag Co. on all the social media. Be sure that you like this video. If you're on YouTube, give it a thumbs up, give us a like, subscribe, all the social media things. The link to download this pattern is either in the description or in my bio. It's in both of my online stores at bythebaybagco.com or payhip/bythebaybagco. So I hope you enjoyed this, and please share whichever ones you make. I'd love to see them.